Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, we have a guest speaker from Corteva. Scott Jungman joins us for an action-packed discussion on the specifics of using the Enlist system and why farmers like it. Ben talks about the newest collaboration with MS Technologies, Corteva, and BASF regarding soybean cyst nematodes. Check out the full press release linked in the description. Peter Ziehan updates us about the world's future regarding the importance of agriculture.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today, Ben and I are going to hold the fort down. Turk's out on the road, so we have a really special guest today, and we're going to lead right into it.
Yeah, so today we have Scott Jungman, Enlist Field Specialist. Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about the territory that you cover, and we'll start getting into talking about some Enlist soybeans.
You bet, Ben. Happy to be here with you folks this morning. A great opportunity to talk about Enlist. So I'm the Enlist Field Specialist for Iowa. I'm from the Corteva Corporation, and that represents the Enlist herbicides. And I cover the state of Iowa for Enlist. I have for a long time. My background's in chemical and seed both. So this is kind of where I wanted to be, the twilight, seventh inning of my career, and just having a ball out here with this Enlist technology along with you guys.
Absolutely. So let's lead into the Enlist program and give us a little bit of background on some of the advantages that the Enlist system has, and talk about a little bit about use rates, and let's start at that point.
Well, I think the two big advantages that jump up right off the bat is yield and performance. Of course, with your Mershman genetics, the yield equation that you put together in collaboration with Corteva and MS Technologies, Mershman, Stein. It was a great collaboration. The yield is certainly there, along with the agronomic traits, and then of course the weed control that comes with this herbicide trait system. The weed control is what drives it, of course, and the fact that farmer can take his worst water hemp acre, worst broadleaf acre, and turn it over to an E3 system and get excellent control out there. So that's what drives it. And over the last 4 years, we've worked through some of these finer nuances of how to use Enlist the best way in terms of the stressing the importance of residual herbicides up front, and then stressing multiple modes of action over the top post-emergence when we spray our Enlist. Because we always want to be mindful for the ugly head of resistance to rear up, and we know someday that'll probably happen, but we know we can prevent that for a long time by stewarding this technology the best we can.
Yeah, you and I talked yesterday just a little bit on the phone, and you were out spraying some plots, and one of the main differences with this technology compared to the competing technology that's out there is the length of time for the application to happen. So let's talk a little bit about what our window of application is with the Enlist system on soybeans.
Right. Well, of course, one leading technology that the dicamba system, their window closed 10 days ago, June 20th in Iowa, and the Enlist window is still open as long as we've got soybeans out there in the R1 stage. That's our we don't have a counter cutoff, as you're aware. We have an R1 growth stage, which is the same growth stage as glufosinate. I'm starting to see some flowers out in these soybean fields. Those fields are okay. It's it's when that full plant is fully flowered that people need to be wrapping up these applications. So and I think that's consistent with what's going on in the country anyway. We are wrapping up applications, and so I think we're in a really good spot right now.
One of the tougher questions that I've gotten, Scott, is what happens to that plant? We have had fields where you've sprayed Liberty late on soybean fields, and it'll actually knock flowers off. If you are, obviously we always recommend to follow label instructions, but if you're leaning towards that R2 time frame, we don't necessarily see any yield reductions or penalties or anything of that standpoint, do you?
No. The tolerance that E3 soybean plant has to 2,4-D choline that's in Enlist 1 and Enlist Duo, that tolerance is extremely robust. We've looked at 4 times the use rate It's really something. It's a process in cooperation with the EPA that you determine your label lengths and when you have to cease applications. So no, we don't expect to be getting some calls if somebody bumped up against the field, an applicator went out there and applied it a couple days too late.
Yeah, actually, the process for the development of the Enlist E3 trait over in Fowler, Indiana, where they did all the work for the efficacy of the herbicide, which was done by Dow at that time, and there was over 300 events that were selected, which at that time was unheard of because the original Roundup event was 1. And so they were able to spray all these different combinations and time frames and everything and pick the very most robust event that then became the basis for what we're using today. And I was very fortunate to be able to go out there and see that whole process, and there is not a better trait than the Enlist E3. So, if you remember a year ago what we were talking about, we're talking about a dirty trait, which really infuriated myself because I knew that it was a speculation at best. So anyhow, the Enlist E3 trait is an awesome trait, and it's just going to keep getting better because MS Tech and Corteva, we're going to continue to make it better, continue to add components to it in the future. So it's not just going to be what we have today.
So some of the field questions that I've gotten this week, Scott, are kind of lead into that trait robustness, and we have some customers that are using the trait for the first time in the Mid-South or the southern portion of the Midwest, and they're seeing speckling going on, they're seeing frying their beans going on, and this is their first year with the trait. They've been on the dicamba platform before. What are some of the things that pop out in your head when you see speckling on soybeans, necrosis, I guess, or what are some of the causal agents of that symptomology, knowing that it's not the Enlist system?
Well, I'll digress just a minute, Ben, and I think Joe can remember back this time. I'm not going to assume you're as old as myself or Joe, but before the Roundup trait, we used to spray our beans with Blazer and Flex Star and Cobra, and sometimes we throw a little systemic Pinnacle in there for good measure to make sure they stunted and burn. And so we have some experience with that, don't we, Joe?
Oh yeah, it was pretty scary there, actually, because you thought you killed your beans, but that's what you had to do to get rid of the weeds.
That's what we did, and so that's my background, and so I thought Joe might be able to relate to that. But my experience, and I think this is bore out with all the yield that's associated with this, is that, there's your glufosinate, your Liberty compounds, your oils, such as in your Everprex, your dual metochlor, you might be putting in there for residuals, your crop oil, your methylated seed oil that I'll probably talk about in a little bit. Those products will cause some speckling. And I want growers to know that that's the last thing they really need to worry about. We really need to focus on trying to kill these weeds because we're running out of time. Crops are going to be canopying, and we need to make sure we get them this last time when we're out there with that sprayer. So that speckling is cosmetic. We're not talking about a systemic. The difference between contact and a systemic is, the hot knife touches your skin, it burns a little bit, but it goes away and it's just pretty superficial, as opposed to a systemic herbicide that's like inserting a knife and twisting. And these herbicides are systemic, but yet again, they're transgenic. They're bred to tolerate high rates of Enlist and Roundup, glyphosate, and glufosinate. So again, to wrap up the question though, the speckling is not something I worry about. We're not dealing with a systemic type of injury. It's more of a cosmetic burn from the oils that are in these products. And it's not something I want growers to think about. In fact, if you do see a little bit, you probably got some pretty outstanding weed control.
Yep, but the speckling by itself doesn't come from the 2,4-D, the Enlist 1 or the Enlist Duo. It's coming from other components that are added into the tank. Is kind of what I wanted you to hit on there, and you did that.
Thank you, Ben. Sorry.
Nope. And you hit on that perfectly there. So let's lead into that. We are at July 1st. We have probably another week in some areas. Some later planting guys will have a little bit longer than this, but we have about a week left to get control of our weeds, and some of the water hemp is off label at this point. Some of the mare's tail is taller than what we want it to be. What are you doing? What are some of the suggestions that you have to control some of these weeds that are potentially hardening off at this point?
That's a great question, and it's very relevant because they are hardening off. And so a couple things with Enlist, you'll hear me talk in the winter meetings, and I say take control of your sprayers again. In other words, use these sprayers for what they are, and they're supposed to be spraying a product and covering the weed. And we're going for coverage. We have nozzles that are much more user friendly now. The AIXRs, the TTJs, the turbo twin nozzles. There's just great nozzles that helps with coverage. Gallonage helps with coverage, and I think it's probably the most important thing is running on the higher end of the pressure range, and don't decreasing your pressure on the outside of your field, because downwind there's not that many things susceptible that we have to worry about downwind, at least in consideration of farm fields. For example, soybeans of any technology, corn, oats, alfalfa are fine downwind. So we're going for coverage. And then the final thing I want to add is let's get some surfactant in there. For myself, I'm running 2 pints of methylated seed oil on all my applications right now. It adds a little bit of expense, but I really like it in terms of giving great penetration onto that weed surface, whether it's hardened off or not. And a cheaper alternative to that might be adding 1% crop oil concentrate per acre to get those weeds that are out there. So cover it up with full rates, 2 pints of Enlist, the only rate of Enlist we use, and have some surfactant in there, and always have a tank mix partner, glufosinate or glyphosate in there, please.
So what do you think? I mean, you hit on it there. So our glufosinate or Liberty, do you think that's an excellent component to help with some of those mare's tail and water hemp for doing really heavy lifting, heavy hammer hitting, adding the Enlist one with potentially both the Roundup and the Liberty?
Yeah. And yeah, Liberty itself is a really good mare's tail product. It works really great in conjunction with Enlist. Together, 1 + 1 does equal 3 on mare's tail. So that's one in particular I jump up. I'm not a huge fan of the 3-way glyphosate, glufosinate, and Enlist. I think it gets you a lot of heat. I would rather you focus on a great application with coverage using that surfactants, picking glyphosate or glufosinate, one or the two. You can certainly do a side-by-side. I know you guys are probably love to test things and compare the traits or compare the sprays out there, and send me a picture, send you guys a picture. I'd love to see it. But these last applications, let's focus on making great applications. The one thing I'd finally say is I'd probably try to be making these applications in the morning hours. I doubt there's a heavy dew out there, but anything after 7 a.m. in the morning right now till 11 a.m. is pretty ideal. But these hot, dry, windy afternoons are going to be tough to kill weeds in. The herbicide just doesn't make it to the ground.
How much water?
Well, with glyphosate, we want no less than 15. With glufosinate, we want 20. 15 with Gly, 20 with glue, or Liberty. I say glue, glufosinate, Liberty. Liberty likes that coverage more so. Liberty really needs coverage to make it work the best. And so 20 gallons.
What's your pressure range that you were talking about? You said up the pressure. If a guy is typically running 35 to 40 psi, are you pushing him into the 55, 60 psi range if his nozzles will carry that?
Go out to enlist.com and look at our nozzle. Find your nozzle on the approved nozzle chart, and then look at the ideal pressure range. But for an AIXR nozzle, I think the 04s or the 06s, you can go up to 60 psi. Now, granted, if you do this higher pressure, you're going to change your calibration some, so you're going to have to be cognizant of that. But we're looking for coverage, And when a grower has the time to calibrate and do things right, we do want you running on the higher end of the recommended acceptable pressure range that you can find on enlist.com.
It's all about coverage. So I guess one of the last questions I wanted to ask you while we had you here, Scott, was what are some of the things that you have been out on? I assume you've been out on fields where we may have missed some Enlist. We have missed some weeds. So the 2,4-D works. It rolls the water hemp down, and then 10 days later the water hemp seems to pop back up. What are some of the things that you, in your history, have looked at, or in your experience have seen that growers have missed that are causing issues like that?
Well, the big one that jumps out, Ben, that's a great question. The big one jumps out is the wrong nozzles. A lot of people are still using those old dicamba nozzles, the TTI nozzle, and it puts out a real coarse droplet designed not to drift. That was its purpose. With Enlist, we want something that's putting out a finer application than that, smaller droplets than that. So those large droplets, they just sometimes don't give us the coverage, and we find them not to be as good. I'm still getting calls from people that don't think that, don't realize we always request a second broadleaf tank mix partner, either glyphosate or glufosinate. I got a call from Northern Iowa yesterday, and they could not believe that they weren't killing 100% of a very high population of water hemp. And I said, well, did you use gly or glue? And well, we didn't use either. So we've got some work cut out for us out there, as Merschman and myself and Corteva, we've got work to do to get to all the growers. But, the folks that are watching this cast, they're going to hopefully realize that there's some things we can do around nozzle selection, around making sure we got a broad spectrum broadleaf program going out there. 2 modes of action, Enlist plus gly or glue, putting in those surfactants. That's a big thing right now, is getting those surfactants in there. But the ones a few calls that I've had have been related to pressure, heavy weed pressure, and usually a lack of putting the glyphosate or glufosinate in there. In some cases, people are not using pre-herbicides, and we know we always want to get a pre down if we can get one of those down too.
And that's I'd like to clarify that just a little bit. So if you had, when you're using Enlist and you always want a tank mix partner with that Enlist, your number 1 and number 2 options that you would choose would be glyphosate Roundup, glufosinate Liberty, not another residual style herbicide, because I've had guys ask me that in the past, is can I run Outlook in it? Can I run Zidua in it? Can I run Dual as that second product? You're telling me that your number 1 and number 2 options are either Liberty or Roundup.
Yeah. So the Enlist I'm spraying on my own farm, yes. Number 1 or 2 is gly or glue, glyphosate Roundup or glufosinate Liberty. We have to have one of those 2 programs to really what we consider qualify as a Corteva acre, one that we would service and support fully. Not that we wouldn't go out on any acre and welcome any field calls, but we're doing this because we know it adds that extra booster on broadleaves. Enlist of course is doing the heavy lifting. The 2,4-D choline in Enlist 1 is doing the heavy lifting, but that glyphosate and that glufosinate, they add just enough that we get something closer to 95 to 100% control, 100% a lot of times.
Awesome.
Well, the farmers are voting and they're buying more Enlist every year. So I've seen the projections. They're projecting north of 40%, maybe even 50% market share this year for the trait. So it is going to be the most dominant trait in the industry as time goes on, probably because it works and probably because it yields. So that's the farmers that haven't experienced it. We welcome you aboard, and those of you that are using it, we sincerely thank you, and we'll just keep making it better. That's our plan.
Awesome. So Scott Jungman, Enlist Field Specialist for Corteva, we look forward to having you on here in the future again, and thank you very much for your time.
Anytime, guys. I really, truly enjoy it. You guys do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Scott had a lot of good information there, Ben, and hopefully that helps our folks that are out finishing up their spraying and those that haven't used the Enlist product to check it out. So a lot more exciting news this week. This press release came out this Thursday regarding a MS Tech, Corteva, and BASF announcement about a new soybean BT basically for cyst nematodes. And it's a BASF trait, and the cross licensings that occurred between the Enlist and the BASF system to bring this to market. It is and we'll put the link up for the press release so you can read it, but it is a product that will be available from these various companies and widely licensed. But basically what we have is a soybean plant that will have the Enlist E3 trait in it that will be a BT, actually Cry14 for cyst nematode. So right now talking about 8% improvement in yield, and where cyst nematodes are a problem. It's not going to be available to the end of the decade because it's got to go through the entire regulatory system because it is a biotech trait. So check that out, and might be some help over the next hill for soybean cyst nematode managing it. So that's pretty exciting. Ben, I'm going to flip it back to you, and then you can flip it back to me, and I'll finish up some of the other things that came up this week on my radar.
Yep, so the first one that I have here is tar spot was first reported in central Iowa this past week, and we'll put the link on there. It's one of those things we need to start scouting for. The pictures that Iowa State reported on just show 1 or 2 of the little pustules that are on the leaves, but that's how hard it is to start scouting for. And if you are seeing the pustules develop, that means the spores are already on the other leaves. So this is the reason why guys are pushing their fungicides earlier or using the in-furrow products like Zeihan to protect themselves against this, because as soon as you see it, it's like southern rust, it's going to blow up really quickly. So be out there and scout your fields, or be ready to get the fungicides on, because it is it's already taking foot.
Well, this is a very, very serious disease to manage, and if you don't, it can take your corn yield away really, really fast. So you want to stay on top of it. And what county was it?
Marshall County.
Marshall County is where they first spotted it. So, I mean, that's just a matter of it's probably out there and widespread, and we better be ready for it.
Yep. And the other thing that I had this week with the dry weather that we're fighting, hopefully we have some rains here that are going to make some of these problems go away, but I was in my first field of spider mites.
Oh, no.
This past week. So one of those things about, it's always advantageous. Everybody likes to have their fields mowed up and looking nice on the field edges, but when it's dry like this, to keep your weeds tall, keep the spider mites in the ditches, not to keep the weeds or the grasses in the ditches tall. When you mow down tight like that, it has a tendency to allow the spider mites to move from the edge of the field in towards the centers.
It drives them into the fresh green, yep.
Yep. So I have some pictures here of one of the fastest ways to identify spider mites is laying a white piece of paper down, take the soybean plant, shake it over the top, and then just wait for a second, and all of a sudden you'll see all these little dirt specks start to move. So that's a pretty good indicator that you have spider mite issues. The 2 products that University of Michigan recommend are dimethylate and bifenthrin. The first product is an organophosphate. The second product is a pyrethroid. You don't want to use other pyrethroids like Warrior or Mustang Max, because they have a tendency to cause more flares, where the other 2 products are going to work really well against the spider mites and hopefully not have that flare back effect where you kill all of the beneficials as well as the spider mites out there, and you have a few spider mites left because they're really hard to kill because they're on the bottom side of the soybean plant. Those are the 2 products that the University of Michigan definitely represents.
Spider mites move from the outside of the edge of the field towards the middle of the field. You got to get ahead of them too, because they will literally suck every good juice out of a soybean plant, cause tremendous yield damage, particularly during pod fill. So spider mites, you just can't be over, rain arrests it, they go away. But if it stays dry, you got to really stay on top of that one. That's a tough one.
Yep, so keep an eye out for that, especially in your drier, sandier fields. So that's what I had for this week.
Okay, the other couple things that I had was we're going to put a link up today from Peter Ziehan. He was at Iowa State University. He has a little 2.5-minute little segment, and he's a geopolitical analyst and kind of put out some alarming information about because of the war with Russia and Ukraine and how it's going to affect the world food supply and how many more folks are going to be faced with famine. And he talks about technology and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, if you don't have food, you don't need gas, you don't need technology, you need food. And so we're heading into a strong demand for food. The United States is going to be the place to access it, so that it's a negative positive message. I guess it's negative from the standpoint of so many more people going into famine, but the positive part is an American farmer and universities like Iowa State University and Purdue and all the technology they're putting out to increase yields can hopefully respond to that demand. So watch that little video there and put things into perspective of what we do in this business. Is pretty interesting. And then the last thing that came across my radar was the Supreme Court ruling, one of the last rulings they put out for this session on the EPA. And basically what they're saying is the EPA does not have a unilateral authority and the ability to decide climate change, what the emissions are for carbon dioxide and whatnot. That authority has to be specifically given to them from Congress. So sit back and see how this affects coal-fired generation plants. Are they going to open back up? I don't know, but I'm just saying that this was a big thing from the standpoint of the climate change initiative. It could be a setback, or in other words, it's going to have to go back to Congress for them to decide something. And the concern is Congress can't decide anything. They're kind of a stalemate. So pay attention to that.
It's a win for regulatory.
Yep. So we will put a little TikTok video up, a young lady explaining exactly what this is going on in a very short measure. Well, that brings us to the corny joke, and I put a little overtime into it this week because I know it's 4th of July. So it's a festive time. It's a time when we celebrate our independence as a country, and so therefore I thought we'd be appropriate to have corny jokes that tied into the 4th of July. So, Ben, here we go.
Here we go.
What kind of tea did the American colonists want? What kind of tea did the American colonists want? Liberty, okay? I'm warming up, okay?
Yep.
What's the difference between a duck and George Washington? What's the difference between a duck and George Washington? One has a bill on his face, and the other has his face on a bill. Okay, dollar bill, get it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one's okay.
All right, okay. This one here is more agriculture related, 4th of July. Mixed them all together. What do you get if you cross George Washington with cattle feed? What would you get if you cross George Washington with cattle feed? The fodder of our country. Okay. I got a couple more, and then we'll let you have a few days off here with the 4th of July. If you crossed a patriot with a curly-haired dog, what would you get? Cross a patriot with a curly-haired dog. What would you get? A Yankee poodle. Not Yankee Doodle, Yankee Poodle, okay? And the last one I actually have two more. I just will sell, if we're going to ruin everybody's day, we might as well go all the way, okay? Why doesn't fire get to enjoy a day off on the 4th of July? Why doesn't fire get to enjoy the day off on the 4th of July? Because fire works.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
And the last one, this one here is, okay, you decide. What did a patriot put on his dry skin? What did a patriot put on his dry skin? Revolution. Revolution.
You outdid yourself, Joe.
So anyhow, I just thought, we don't many times tie in 4th of July and corny jokes, and well, anyhow, farmers are busy right now, and we know you are watching that crop. watching it proceed, and we know that there's so much things going on right now. We hope that you get an opportunity to spend a little time with your family this weekend. We sincerely appreciate your business, and we'll see you next week.